Deadpool 2. It's not as good as the first one. Sequels are inherently hard to make, as you're essentially required to deliver roughly the same sort of feel and tone as the first one, while also making it feel distinct enough to actually justify its own existence. What this usually translates to is the bigger is better problem. You like the gore and the dirty jokes? Well, brilliant, we can do those, but more. The trouble is that can feel quite tired after a while, and that's definitely true of the meta humour in particular in Deadpool 2. That's coupled, I think, with a slightly heavier touch on the jokes than there was in the original film. A lot of the jokes in this film start off good and then kind of slide out of control and aren't that funny after a while. Near the opening of the film, Deadpool makes a reference to camera about how they were as successful as the Passion of the Christ overseas. That's a pretty funny joke, it's a good reference, it's like him saying, I'm in the same sentence as Jesus. And then at the end of the joke, he's like, of course, overseas they don't have religion, so that explains that. And unfortunately that means that not only have they pushed the joke a little too far, but they've taken an easy sidestep into sort of ironic racism, I guess, which isn't really that funny. And if you do too many of these meta jokes, or if you over-explain everything, repeat everything over and over again, it can get a bit wearing for the audience after a while. At least that's how I feel about it. To be honest, in my cinema, the audience's biggest laughs were reserved for things I recognise the name of, but they weren't particularly hard laughs and they didn't last very long. I don't know if anyone's going to be going home and saying, you wouldn't believe the reference that Deadpool made to another film that exists. My favourite thing about the first Deadpool film was that it was a really serviceable superhero film in its own right, so when it was making fun of all those superhero tropes, it felt like it came from an informed point of view. It wasn't a parody, it was a pastiche. It was taking on parts of that form and then making fun of them in a subversive way. Deadpool 2 veers a little more into parody territory, and to be honest, at times uses its jokes to cover up its pretty weak writing overall. Underneath all the self-deprecating jokes, there's a really messy first act in Deadpool 2, which is a common problem for sequels. After all, basically what you have to do in the first act is to not just motivate, but re-motivate your characters on an arc that will take them through that film, which here is done in one of the most cliche ways, killing off the girlfriend in the first 5 minutes of the movie or so. To its credit, the title sequence that immediately follows that makes fun of that trope quite heavily, but then, does bad writing stop being bad writing just because you know you're doing it? I'm not convinced. What we end up with is a piecemeal and boring first act that basically jumps from setting to setting, plot to plot, trying to work out what it wants to be. We start off with Deadpool in a sort of international mercenary role, then his girlfriend dies, then he's sad and he's in the bar, then he gets taken to the X-Mansion, then he becomes an X-Man, then he does something illegal, and then he gets put in some sort of like Black Ops prison. And it's only really at that point that we start getting into the actual plot of the film, which is a shame because the second act of the film is probably its best part, following Deadpool and his buddies putting together a raid on a convoy of supervillains. Here we get an absolutely phenomenal comedic and action sequence which follows X-Force as they parachute down to this supervillain convoy. And it's fair to say actually that the fights throughout this have remained at the high level that we saw in the previous film. I really like the way that they used the powers of the characters in this. Domino's luck power is really well used and very cinematic and clever, but also Deadpool's powers get used more than they often do, including one really good moment in a fight with Cable where he basically strangles Cable with his own broken arm, which I think is a really wonderful use of that regeneration power. So does Deadpool 2 succeed or fail as a film and as a sequel? It deals with all those normal creative problems that a sequel has, not least because the director of the original film left after creative differences with Ryan Reynolds, and I think a fair amount of the cast and crew went with him. It's got a shonky plot, but then so did the original, which didn't even have a second act. It quite often overplays its hand with its humour, but then apparently the audience I was in didn't really mind about that. I suspect, as with a lot of sequels, the people who enjoyed the original will probably enjoy this one. I just don't really see it being a film that people think about after the fact or recommend to their friends or whatever. Anyway, that's it from me. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought about Deadpool 2. If you're a big fan of the first film and you love this one, or if you're a big fan and you hated this one, you felt like it was a bit of a letdown, let me know in the comments box down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you like this review, don't forget to click like and then a subscribe button so you can get the next one when it comes out. That's it from me. Bye for now.